Even though the 2020 Winter Olympics just wrapped up, I already have an amazing pitch for its next locale. Hell. After all, it must be frozen over after the headline that just came out. Taliban call for Russia-Ukraine peace. Say they fear for civilians. Yes, you read that correctly, and no, that is not coming from the Babylon Bee. The Taliban, rulers of the jihadi-ran theocracy known as Afghanistan, and responsible for the deaths of countless across it, want peace. Let's take a closer look. The Taliban government of Afghanistan has called for peace between Russia and Ukraine and expressed concern over civilian casualties as Russian forces threatened the Ukrainian capital of Kiev on Friday. Afghanistan Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Abdul Kahar Balki issued a statement in English on Twitter on Friday morning, urging a resolution to the crisis through, quote, dialogue and peaceful means. And let's go ahead and take a look at that full statement. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan is closely monitoring the situation in Ukraine and expresses concern about real possibility of civilian casualties. The Islamic Emirate calls for restraint by both parties. All sides need to desist from taking positions that could intensify violence. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, in line with its foreign policy of neutrality, calls on both sides of the conflict to resolve the crisis through dialogue and peaceful means. The Islamic Emirate also calls on parties to the conflict to pay attention to safeguarding the lives of Afghan students and migrants in Ukraine. Weird, because they couldn't afford that same courtesy to Americans who were stuck within their own country. So, my oh my, where to even begin? Well, knowing what we know about the Taliban, let's start by offering a more contextual headline. The Taliban, the Islamic State responsible for the murder of over 100 ex-Afghan and international forces, circulating a kill list targeting the LGBT community, threatening to send 2,000 jihadi suicide bombers to the Afghan DC embassy, releasing the mass murderer from prison who went on to massacre American soldiers and Afghan citizens in a suicide bombing, fostering the jump to Afghanistan being the hardest place in the world to be a Christian, and, of all things, setting a woman on fire for her, quote, bad cooking. That Taliban is now calling for peace between Russia and Ukraine. If you're just as confounded as any other sane person would be when hearing this, you're in good company. But the question still remains. Why would the Taliban even be throwing its hat into the ring of public opinion like this? What do they have to gain? Well, apparently a lot. You see, despite their methods, the Taliban would like to be recognized as legitimate on the world stage. Hence why they have been a tad bit more open to dialogue in meetings. What benefit does this have for the jihadis? Well, I can think of at least 144 million reasons. That is how many dollars we've sent to Afghanistan since the takeover. Make no mistake, while this aid is designated as being for humanitarian purposes, a portion of it will undoubtedly go to the funding of the Taliban and their activities. Daniel Greenfield of the Freedom Center notes, humanitarian aid is one of the best ways to fund Islamic terrorists. The Taliban imposes an Islamic tithe, which American taxpayers will end up paying once the millions in aid arrive. When the United States was in control of Afghanistan, U.S. aid and the UN were exempted from government taxes. That was only fair, considering that the vast majority of Afghanistan's money came from U.S. aid and the UN. But the local Afghan, quote, implementing partners paid taxes to the government, and if they did business in Taliban territory, they also paid off the jihadists. We don't know exactly how much taxpayer money went to the Taliban, but one survey found that contractors priced in 20% to 30% from their contracts as payoffs. More formally, the Taliban tend to charge a 10% Islamic tax on income and a 2.5% Islamic wealth tax. While this is modest compared to taxes in some Western socialist countries, the only service the Taliban provide is not killing you. That doesn't require much infrastructure, but is really valuable on the ground. Even if the UN succeeds in exempting its operations from taxes, the, quote, implementing partners, local Afghan groups, will still pay taxes to the Taliban, and their employees and those of the groups they fund will certainly be taxed. If the United States funds doctors and clinics, they will be taxed, as they were before the fall of Kabul. If we fund teachers, they will pay taxes to the Taliban, and so will every beneficiary of our, quote, humanitarian aid. That's why it's common for there to be a humanitarian crisis in terrorist hellholes like Yemen or Gaza. No matter how much aid is sent in, the crisis never goes away because the terrorists not only steal the aid, they deliberately create the crises so that they have more aid to steal. If you're interested in reading the full article, I'll link to it in the description. The bottom line is that taxpayer money will, in some capacity, be used to fund terrorist activities. But as long as the Taliban is recognized as legitimate, that money can just be sent off in the name of aid and it'll be called a day. The Taliban knows this, and this is why they've been trying to hit all of the main talking points to get into the club, like calling for aid to help combat climate change. Now, all of this shows the willingness and the patience of jihadis to implement and spread Sharia, a direct mandate from their most trusted sources, as Sharia and its tenets were either pulled directly from or inspired by the Quran and the Sunnah, the latter of which is made up by the Hadith and the biography of Muhammad. In it, we find the exhortation to fight those who do not believe in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, that is, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. The jizya is meant to be an Islamic tax that financially subjugates the non-Muslim population as a sign of their inferiority, as the Quran itself proclaims. Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the scriptures, Jews and Christians, and al-mushrikun, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures. Therefore, by frivolously sending aid with not nearly enough vetting being done to ensure that it's properly appropriated, we only solidify the Sharia-based state there. The situation between Russia and the Ukrainians is saddening, but for the Taliban, it's an opportunity to game the system as much as possible and maximize the jizya they receive from those there under them. Now, if the US had much sense, they'd think twice before sending this sort of aid without properly making sure it's going to the right places and being used for the right reasons. But that's probably too much to ask.